I found the envelope in Richard's desk drawer 3 days after we buried him. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the insurance papers our financial advisor needed, going through Richard's home office with that numb, autopilot efficiency that grief sometimes gifts you. The mahogany desk he'd loved so much. The one we'd picked out together at that estate sale in Connecticut, now felt like a museum piece. Everything in this room, his reading glasses on the side table, his coffee mug still sitting on the coaster. The faint smell of his cologne felt frozen in time. The envelope was tucked in the back of the bottom drawer, behind folders of old tax returns. Cream-colored, expensive paper. The kind Richard always used for important correspondence. My name was written on it in his handwriting. But the ink looked faded, like it had been there for years. Inside was a letter, and attached to it, a copy of his will. Not the will we'd reviewed together with our attorney 2 years ago. A different one, dated 6 months before his death. My hands started shaking before I even finished reading the first paragraph. I stood there in his office, the afternoon light streaming through the window, and felt my entire world tilt sideways. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of building a life together, 10 years of believing I understood the man I'd loved. The letter was brief, almost clinical. He explained that he'd made changes to protect his children's inheritance. That he hoped I'd understand. That this house, where we'd lived together, where I'd nursed him through 2 years of declining health, would go to his daughter Jennifer. That his investment accounts, his retirement funds, everything, except a small life insurance policy, would be divided between Jennifer and his son Michael. He wrote that he loved me. That this wasn't about love. It was about fairness to his children. I read it 3 times, standing there in that silent office, trying to make the words mean something different than what they clearly stated. The house would go to Jennifer. I looked around the office, then out into the hallway toward the living room I'd repainted last spring. The kitchen where I'd made countless meals, the bedroom, where I'd sat up nights monitoring Richard's medication schedule, adjusting his oxygen, holding his hand when the pain got bad. The house would go to Jennifer. Jennifer, who'd visited twice in 2 years. Who'd stayed for maybe 40 minutes each time, looking uncomfortable, checking her phone, making excuses about needing to get back to Boston. Jennifer, who hadn't called on her father's birthday. Who'd sent a sympathy card to her own father when he was diagnosed, but never followed up with a phone call. I'd been the one mixing his medications 4 times a day, driving him to every appointment, researching treatment options at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, holding the basin when he was sick, changing sheets, making sure he was never alone, never scared, never without someone who loved him. And now the house would go to Jennifer. I sat down in Richard's desk chair, my desk chair now, I supposed, for however long I had left here, and stared at the will. My attorney brain, the one I'd mostly retired when I married Richard, started automatically analyzing the document. It was legal, properly executed, witnessed, notarized, filed with his attorney 6 months ago, while I was giving him his evening medications and reading him the news. Because his eyes had gotten too tired, Richard had been planning this. The front door opened downstairs. I heard voices in the foyer, footsteps on the hardwood floors. I'd forgotten. Jennifer and Michael were coming over this afternoon to go through some of Richard's things. We'd arranged it at the funeral reception, when everything was chaos and casseroles and I was still functioning on shock and politeness. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed both documents in my cardigan pocket. My hands had stopped shaking. That autopilot efficiency was back, the same mechanism that had gotten me through the funeral, through the reception, through 3 days of phone calls and arrangements and people telling me how sorry they were. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and went downstairs to meet my stepchildren. Jennifer was in the living room, already examining the bookshelf. She was 42, tall and angular. Like her father, with the kind of casual elegance that comes from never having worried about money. Designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, expensive leather boots. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Michael stood by the window, hands in his pockets. 39, stockier than his sister, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. He worked in finance in Manhattan. Both of them did well for themselves. Richard had been proud of that. They both turned when I came down the stairs. "Margaret," Jennifer said. Her voice was carefully modulated. The tone you'd use with a stranger at a networking event. "I hope we're not too early." "No, right on time." I managed a smile. The autopilot was good at smiles. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "We're fine," Michael said quickly. "We don't want to impose. We know this is a difficult time." I wondered if he actually believed that. If either of them had any real concept of what this time was like for me. Dad mentioned he wanted us to have some specific things. Jennifer said, moving toward the mantel where Richard had displayed family photos. She picked up a framed picture of Richard with his late wife. Taken maybe 25 years ago. This was Mom's favorite photo of them. I'd dusted that photo every week for 10 years. I'd never asked Richard to put it away. Never suggested he remove any traces of his first wife. She'd been part of his life, part of his history. I'd respected that. Jennifer set the photo in a cardboard box she'd brought with her. "And these books," she continued, running her finger along the bookshelf. "Dad's first editions. He always said these would be mine." I watched her select volumes from the shelf. Richard and I had spent countless evenings in this room, him reading in his armchair by the lamp. Me on the sofa with my own book. Sometimes he'd read passages aloud to me. Especially near the end when reading tired him out. And he wanted to share something he'd found beautiful or interesting. Michael moved to the desk in the corner, not Richard's office desk upstairs, but the antique writing desk in the living room. He opened the top drawer and started examining the contents. "We should probably talk about logistics," Michael said, not looking at me. "About the house and everything." "Logistics," I repeated carefully. Jennifer glanced at her brother, then at me. For the first time, something like discomfort crossed her face. "Dad's attorney called us yesterday. About the will. We assumed you knew." "About the will," I said, still using that same careful tone. "The house," Michael said. He'd found what he was looking for in the desk drawer, a vintage fountain pen that had belonged to Richard's father. He turned it over in his hands, not meeting my eyes. "Dad left it to Jennifer. We thought you'd been informed." "I found out about an hour ago," I said. The room went quiet. Jennifer set down the book she'd been holding. "We know this is awkward," she said finally. "But Dad wanted to make sure his estate went to his children." "It's not personal." Not personal. I'd heard those words before, in my legal career. They were almost always a lie. Everything about family and property and inheritance was personal. "Of course," I said. The autopilot smile was back. "I understand completely." Michael looked relieved. Jennifer's shoulders relaxed slightly. "We're not trying to rush you," Jennifer added. "We know you need time to make arrangements. Find a new place. We were thinking maybe 60 days? That should be enough time, right? 60 days to leave the home I'd lived in for a decade. The home where I'd cared for their father through the worst period of his life. When they couldn't be bothered to visit. 60 days should be fine, I heard myself say. They continued sorting through Richard's possessions for another hour. I stood there and watched them box up pieces of the life Richard and I had built together. The books we'd read, the photographs I'd framed, the small antiques we'd collected at estate sales on weekend drives. When they finally left, promising to be in touch about next steps, I closed the door behind them and stood in the foyer. The house felt different now. Emptier. Like it was already starting to reject me. I went back upstairs to Richard's office and took out the letter again. This time, I read past the first paragraph. Read the whole thing carefully, with my attorney's eye. Richard had been thorough. He'd explained his reasoning in detail. His children had always expected to inherit his estate. It's what he'd promised their mother before she died. When he'd married me, he'd felt obligated to honor that promise. The house had been his and his first wife's home before she passed. It held memories of their family. He hoped I'd understand that it needed to stay in the family. The small life insurance policy he'd left me $50,000 was meant to help me get established somewhere new. He'd calculated it would be enough for a down payment on a modest condo. He'd signed the letter, with love and gratitude. For everything you've given me. I set the letter down and looked around the office again. At the bookshelf where I'd organized his medical binders. The file cabinet where I'd kept meticulous records of every doctor's visit, every test result, every medication change. The small table where I'd set up his pill organizer every Sunday, sorting medications into those little compartments. Making sure everything was exactly right. I'd given up my legal career when I married Richard. I'd been a partner at a mid-sized firm in Hartford, specializing in estate planning and family law. Richard had been retired, wanting to travel, wanting to enjoy his remaining years. I'd taken early retirement to be with him. We were supposed to have adventures. Then came the diagnosis, and the treatments, and the slow, grinding reality of serious illness. I'd never regretted staying with him through it. I'd loved Richard, truly loved him, but he'd made this will 6 months before he died. 6 months of me still caring for him, still believing we were partners in everything. He'd known what he was planning to do, and he'd let me keep believing in a future that he'd already written me out of. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, until I found the name I was looking for. Gerald Pressman. We'd worked together years ago, before I retired. He'd gone on to make partner at a firm in New Haven, specializing in estate litigation. The phone rang twice before he answered. Margaret? His voice was surprised but warm. I was so sorry to hear about Richard. How are you holding up? I need a lawyer, Gerald, I said. Not a friend. A lawyer. There was a pause. Then his tone shifted, becoming more focused, more professional. Tell me what's going on. I told him about the will. About the letter. About Jennifer and Michael coming to pack up their inheritance, while I was still living in what I'd thought was my home. Gerald listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Did you sign a prenuptial agreement? He asked. No. Richard said he didn't believe in them. He said marriage was about trust. Another pause. I could almost hear Gerald's mind working through the legal angles. Margaret, Connecticut is an equitable distribution state. You were married for 10 years. You gave up your career. You provided substantial caregiving services. The house may have been in his name, but you have potential claims here. I know, I said quietly. I taught estate law, remember? Then you know this could get complicated. His children aren't going to want to give up what they think is theirs. I don't care what they want, I said, and I was surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I'm not leaving this house in 60 days. I'm not taking $50,000 and disappearing quietly so they can pretend I was just some woman who happened to be around at the end. All right, Gerald said. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring every document you have. Bank statements, tax returns, medical records, everything. We're going to build a case. I hung up and sat there in Richard's office as the afternoon faded into evening. The envelope with the letter lay on the desk in front of me. Richard had written that he hoped I'd understand. That this was about fairness. I thought about fairness. About 2 years of sleepless nights and morphine schedules and hospital visits. About putting my life on hold to make sure Richard's final years were comfortable. About Jennifer and Michael, who'd inherited their mother's life insurance and investment accounts years ago, now claiming everything their father had left as well. I thought about the word fairness and what it actually meant. Then I opened my laptop and started a new document. Years of legal training came back automatically. I began listing assets, documenting my contributions to the household, noting dates and details of caregiving services provided. If Jennifer wanted this house in 60 days, she was going to have to fight for it. And I'd been a litigator long before I'd been anyone's wife. Gerald Pressman's law office was exactly as I remembered it, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather chairs that had seen decades of difficult conversations, and windows overlooking New Haven's historic green. I'd been here countless times years ago when we'd worked on cases together, back when I was still practicing law. Back when my life had a different shape. Margaret. Gerald stood from behind his desk as his assistant showed me in. He was in his late 60s now, silver-haired but sharp-eyed, wearing the kind of expensive suit that whispered rather than shouted. "I'm glad you came." I set my briefcase on the chair beside me, the same leather briefcase I'd carried during my legal career, now dusty from a decade in the closet. Inside were copies of every document I could find: bank statements, tax returns, medical records, receipts, the marriage certificate, Richard's will, the letter. "I brought everything," I said. Gerald gestured to the conference table by the window. We moved there, and I began laying out documents in organized stacks, while he made notes on a legal pad. Years of training came back automatically. This was familiar territory, even if I was now on the other side of it. "Walk me through the marriage," Gerald said. "Start from the beginning." I told him about meeting Richard at a charity auction. 7 months after his first wife died. He'd been lonely, still grieving, trying to figure out who he was without the woman he'd spent 40 years with. I'd been recently retired, looking for a new chapter. After my own husband's death years earlier, we'd connected over shared loss, over the strange experience of rebuilding a life in your 50s. We dated for 18 months before getting married, I said. His children were polite but distant. Jennifer was going through a divorce at the time. Michael had just made partner at his firm. They were busy with their own lives. Gerald made notes. "Did Richard discuss his estate with you before the marriage?" "He said he'd taken care of everything. That I'd be provided for. We talked about updating his will together after the wedding, making sure everything was fair." I paused, remembering those conversations in Richard's study. How confident he'd seemed about our future. He said he didn't believe in prenuptial agreements, that they represented a lack of faith in the marriage. "But he never updated the will with you present?" "Not the one I knew about. We met with an attorney together about 2 years ago. That will left the house to me. Split his other assets between me and his children." I thought that was still the current version. Gerald tapped his pen against the legal pad. "And you had no knowledge of this second will? The one dated 6 months before his death?" "None. I found it 3 days after the funeral." He reached for the copy I'd brought and read through it carefully. His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. After 20 years of working with Gerald, I knew that tell. He was angry on my behalf. "This is clean," he said finally. "Properly executed, properly witnessed. His attorney will argue it represents his final wishes." "I know. But..." Gerald set the document down and looked at me directly. "Connecticut law provides substantial protections for surviving spouses. You're entitled to an elective share of his estate, regardless of what the will says. That's typically 1/3 of the probate estate. The house alone is worth more than that," I said. "Yes. But here's where it gets interesting." Gerald pulled out a calculator. You said you gave up your legal career when you married Richard. What was your income at that time? I told him. He made notes. And during the marriage, did you contribute financially to the household? My retirement income and savings, yes. I also managed all the household expenses, paid for home improvements. Covered Richard's medical costs that insurance didn't. Do you have documentation? I pulled out another folder. Bank statements showing regular transfers from my accounts. Receipts for the new roof we'd put on the house. The kitchen renovation, medical equipment, prescription costs. I'd kept everything, partly from legal training, partly from habit. Gerald's expression shifted as he reviewed the documents. Margaret, you spent over $200,000 on that house. And Richard's care during your marriage. I thought it was our house, I said quietly. Our life. He was quiet for a moment, still reviewing papers. Then he looked up. You said you provided caregiving for Richard during his illness. Can you detail that? I told him about the diagnosis 2 years into our marriage. About how quickly Richard's health had deteriorated. About becoming his primary caregiver, managing medications. Coordinating with doctors, helping him bathe and dress when he became too weak to do it himself. Sitting up through difficult nights. Advocating for him in hospitals, researching treatment options. I documented everything, I said, pulling out yet another folder. Medical appointments, medication schedules, caregiving logs. I kept detailed records in case we ever needed them for insurance purposes. Gerald paged through the logs. His expression grew darker. These show you providing an average of 60 hours per week of direct caregiving during the final year of Richard's life. It was more some weeks. Less on good days. Do you know what professional caregiving services cost in Connecticut? I'd looked it up last night, unable to sleep. Around $35 an hour for basic care. More for skilled nursing. Gerald made calculations on his legal pad. When he looked up, his voice was very quiet. Margaret, the value of caregiving services you provided in that final year alone exceeds $100,000. Over 2 years, we're looking at close to $250,000. The number hung in the air between us. Combined with your financial contributions to the property and household, Gerald continued. You have a strong argument that you're entitled to significant equitable distribution of marital assets. Far more than the $50,000 Richard left you. His children won't see it that way, I said. His children aren't attorneys. I am. Gerald leaned back in his chair. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to file a claim against the estate on your behalf. We'll argue for equitable distribution. Based on your contributions to the marital property and your provision of caregiving services. We'll also invoke your elective share rights as surviving spouse. They'll fight it. Of course they will. But Margaret, he met my eyes. You were a litigator. You know how this works. They're going to have to explain to a judge why their father's widow who gave up her career, spent her own money improving their father's property, and provided years of intensive caregiving should be forced out of her home with $50,000 while they inherit everything. I thought about Jennifer sorting through the bookshelf. About Michael examining Richard's desk. About their casual assumption that I'd just accept 60 days notice and disappear. How long will this take? I asked. Months, possibly longer if they contest aggressively. But in the meantime, you're not going anywhere. We'll file for your right to remain in the marital home during probate. They can't force you out while this is active litigation. Something loosened in my chest. I wouldn't be homeless in 60 days. There's one more thing, Gerald said carefully. I need to ask you something difficult. Do you believe Richard was in his right mind when he executed this second will? I thought about Richard 6 months before his death. He'd been declining but still lucid, still himself. His memory had been failing in small Ways for getting appointments, repeating stories, but nothing that would suggest incompetence. He knew what he was doing, I said. Gerald nodded slowly. I had to ask. Some attorneys would argue diminished capacity, especially given his medical condition. But that's a dangerous road. It would mean invalidating all his end-of-life decisions. I don't want to do that, I said firmly. Richard made a choice. It was hurtful, it was unfair, but he made it. I'm not going to claim he didn't know his own mind. Then we fight this on equitable distribution. And your rights as surviving spouse. It's the stronger case anyway. Gerald began organizing the documents into his own folders. I'll need you to sign a retainer agreement. My usual rate is $400 an hour. But given our history, I'm willing to work on a contingency basis. 30% of whatever we recover above the $50,000. You've already been left. That's generous. You were a good attorney, Margaret. You would have made partner if you hadn't retired. I always respected your work. He paused. And between you and me, I've seen too many cases like this. Second wives, second families, promises made and broken. It makes me angry every time. I signed the retainer agreement. My signature was steady. What happens next? I asked. I file the claim tomorrow. The estate attorney will receive notice. Jennifer and Michael will be informed that you're contesting the will. Then negotiations begin, or we go to court. Either way, this just became their problem, not just yours. When I left Gerald's office an hour later, I felt different. Lighter. For 3 days I'd been drowning in grief and betrayal. Trying to process Richard's letter, trying to understand how the man I'd loved could have done this. Now I had something concrete to hold on to. A legal strategy. A fight I understood. My phone had been silent all morning, but as I walked to my car, it buzzed. Emily. I'd been so consumed with Richard's estate that I'd barely thought about my daughter. No, that wasn't true. I'd thought about her constantly. But in a distant way, like she was a character in someone else's story. The text message was short. Mom, can we please talk? I'm sorry. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I put the phone back in my purse without responding. Some conversations required more than I could give right now. The drive back to the "How's my house?" I reminded myself, until a court said otherwise, took 40 minutes. Traffic on I-95 was heavy with lunch hour commuters. I merged and changed lanes automatically, my mind already several steps ahead. Jennifer had said 60 days. Today was day 4. I had 56 days left in their timeline. But I was no longer operating on their schedule. I was operating on the court's schedule now. And that was measured in months, not days. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a car I didn't recognize. Parked on the street in front of the house. A silver BMW with Massachusetts plates. As I got out of my car, the BMW's driver door opened. Jennifer stepped out. She was dressed differently than she'd been during her last visit, less casually, more professionally. A tailored pantsuit, heels, her hair down. She looked like she was dressed for a business meeting. In a way, I suppose she was. Margaret, she said, walking up the driveway toward me. I was hoping we could talk. I don't recall us having an appointment, I replied. Not moving toward the house. I know. I should have called first. But I wanted to speak with you privately, without Michael, without attorneys. She stopped a few feet away from me. Can we go inside, please? I considered refusing. Considered telling her that anything she wanted to say could be said through lawyers. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what this was about. Fine, I said, unlocking the front door. We went into the living room, the same room where she'd sorted through Richard's belongings days earlier. I didn't offer her anything to drink. I simply sat in the armchair by the window and waited. Jennifer remained standing for a moment, then perched on the edge of the sofa. She looked uncomfortable, which was interesting. During her previous visit, she'd moved through this house. Like she already owned it. I heard from Dad's attorney this morning, she began. About your claim against the estate. That was fast, I said. He wanted to give me a heads up before the official paperwork arrived. Jennifer folded her hands in her lap. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. About which part? The part where your father left me $50,000 after 10 years of marriage? Or the part where you gave me 60 days to move out of my home? She flinched slightly. The will was Dad's decision. Michael and I had nothing to do with it. But you're happy to benefit from it. Of course we want to honor our father's wishes. But, she paused, choosing her words carefully. We're not unreasonable people. If you felt entitled to more time in the house, you should have just asked. 60 days was a suggestion, not an ultimatum. It felt like an ultimatum, I said. That wasn't our intention. Jennifer's voice had taken on a conciliatory tone. The kind you'd use with a difficult client. Look, I know this situation is complicated. I know you and Dad were happy together. We appreciate everything you did for him, especially during his illness. Do you? Yes. And that's why I'm here. To see if we can work something out without dragging this through the courts. Legal battles are expensive and emotional. They take forever. Nobody wins except the attorneys. I thought about Gerald's $400 per hour. His contingency agreement, the months or years this could take. Jennifer wasn't wrong about that. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Jennifer leaned forward slightly. What if we gave you more time? Say, 6 months instead of 60 days. That would give you plenty of time to find a place, make arrangements. We could even help with moving costs. 6 months, I repeated. Yes. And perhaps. She hesitated. Perhaps we could increase the cash bequest. Not significantly, but enough to show good faith. Say $75,000 instead of $50,000. I looked at her carefully. She was nervous despite the professional demeanor. Her fingers kept twisting the ring on her right hand. A tell I'd noticed during her previous visit. Jennifer, I said quietly. Do you know what your father's estate is worth? I have a general idea. The house alone is valued at $750,000. His investment accounts total another $600,000. His retirement accounts another $300,000. That's $1.6 million. Before we even account for personal property and other assets. She said nothing. You're offering me $75,000 and 6 months to vacate. That's less than 5% of the estate. For a woman who was married to your father for a decade. Who gave up her legal career to be with him. Who spent over $200,000 of her own money on this house and his medical care. Who provided years of intensive caregiving. Jennifer's expression had become more guarded. You're saying you want more. I'm saying I'm entitled to more. Substantially more. And if you'd done even basic research before coming here, you'd know that Connecticut law agrees with me. She stood up abruptly. The conciliatory tone was gone. So this is about money. No, I said, standing as well. This is about respect. About being treated like a partner who mattered. Not a temporary caregiver who can be dismissed with a check and a move-out date. My father left you $50,000. That's not nothing. Your father left me a fraction of what I'm legally entitled to. And you know it. That's why you're here, trying to negotiate instead of waiting for the court filing. Jennifer's face had gone cold. You're making a mistake, Margaret. If you push this, if you force us into litigation, we will fight. And we have resources. So do I said calmly. I have documentation, I have legal grounds, and I have an excellent attorney. What you have is a will. That no judge is going to look favorably on once they hear the full story. The full story, Jennifer repeated, her voice sharp. You mean your version of the story. I mean medical records showing 2 years of intensive caregiving. Financial records showing my contributions to marital property. Tax returns proving I gave up a six-figure legal career. All documented, all factual, all admissible in court. Jennifer grabbed her purse from the sofa. You know what I think? I think you saw an opportunity when you married my father. A wealthy widower, sick and vulnerable. I think you played the devoted wife knowing it would pay off eventually. The accusation hung in the air between us. I felt the anger rise in my chest, but I kept my voice level. Get out of my house, I said quietly. It's not your house. It's my house. My father's house. And you have 56 days left to accept that. 56 days according to you. Months or years according to the court. We'll see which timeline matters. I walked to the front door and opened it. Through my attorney from now on, Jennifer. Only through my attorney. She walked past me without another word. Her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I watched her get into the BMW, watched her sit there for a moment. With both hands on the steering wheel, then watched her drive away. When I closed the door, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from rage. The kind of rage that had been building for days. Layered under grief and shock and hurt. Jennifer thought I'd married Richard for money. That I'd calculated my way into his life. Played devoted wife as a long-term investment strategy. I walked back into the living room and looked at the photos on the mantel. Richard and me at our wedding. Both of us smiling, both of us believing in second chances. Richard at his 70th birthday party, surrounded by family and friends. Richard in the garden last spring. Weak but happy, watching birds at the feeder we'd installed together. I'd loved him, truly loved him, and he'd still chosen to betray me. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Emily. It was Gerald. Margaret, I wanted to update you. I've just been contacted by the estate's attorney. Apparently Jennifer called him right after our meeting this morning. She came to see me, I said. Just left, actually. She tried to negotiate. Offered 6 months and $75,000. Gerald made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. They're scared. That's good. That means they know their position is weak. She accused me of being a gold digger. Of course she did. It's a standard defense tactic when you have no legal leg to stand on. Impugn the widow's character, make it personal, hope she backs down. He paused. Are you backing down? I thought about Jennifer's cold eyes. About her assumption that I'd just accept whatever they offered. About her casual dismissal of 10 years of my life. No, I said. I'm not backing down. Good. Because I just found something interesting in the property records. Something that's going to change the entire complexion of this case. My attention sharpened. What did you find? I'd rather explain in person. Can you come back to the office tomorrow morning? Say 9 o'clock? I'll be there. Oh, and Margaret? Don't answer the door if Jennifer or Michael show up again. Don't engage with them at all. Everything goes through me now. After we hung up, I stood in the living room for a long moment. The house felt different now. Not like a home I was about to lose, but like a battlefield I was defending. I went upstairs to Richard's office, my office now, and opened my laptop. Years of legal instincts were kicking back in. If this was going to be a fight, I needed to be prepared. I started a new document and began typing. Every interaction with Jennifer and Michael since Richard's death. Every comment, every assumption, every attempt at manipulation. Dated, detailed, objective. Documentation was power. And I was very good at documentation. Outside, the sun was setting. The room filled with amber light. I kept typing. This was just beginning. Gerald's office felt different the next morning. More charged somehow, like the air before a thunderstorm. His assistant led me directly to the conference room, where Gerald was already waiting with several folders spread across the table. And his laptop open to what looked like county property records. Coffee? He offered, gesturing to a carafe on the side table. Please. I poured myself a cup and sat down across from him. You said you found something. I did. Gerald turned his laptop so I could see the screen. I spent yesterday afternoon digging through property records for the house. Deed history, title transfers, tax assessments. And I found something that Jennifer and Michael either don't know about or are hoping you don't know about. He pulled up a document dated 11 years ago, 1 year before Richard and I married. This is the deed transfer. When Richard refinanced the house after his first wife died, he'd owned it jointly with her, standard tenancy by entirety. When she passed, it became his sole property. Gerald paused. But look at this. He pointed to a line in the document. The property had been appraised at $420,000 at the time. Richard had taken out a mortgage for $250,000. Okay, I said, not yet seeing where this was going. Now look at this. Gerald pulled up another document. This is the payoff statement for that mortgage, dated 7 years ago. 3 years into your marriage. The mortgage had been paid in full. $238,000, paid in one lump sum. My breath caught. I remember that. Richard said he'd come into some money from an investment. He wanted to own the house free and clear. Did he specify what investment? I thought back. No, he just said he'd had a good year in the market. Wanted to eliminate the mortgage payment. Gerald opened another folder. I subpoenaed Richard's bank records. Yesterday we have the right to examine estate assets. Margaret, there was no investment windfall. The money that paid off that mortgage came from a different source entirely. He slid a bank statement across the table. It showed a wire transfer into Richard's account 7 years ago. $240,000. The source of the transfer made my stomach drop. Collins, Margaret, account number 4789. That was my retirement account, I said slowly. When I retired from the firm, I rolled over my 401k. Richard and I discussed combining our finances, creating a joint strategy. I transferred money into his accounts because he was managing our investments. Did you authorize him to use this money to pay off his mortgage? I tried to remember the conversation. We'd been newlyweds, still figuring out how to merge our financial lives. Richard had been so confident about money, so experienced. I'd trusted him. He said he was reorganizing our assets for tax purposes. That it made sense to consolidate everything under his name since he had better investment accounts. Better relationships with financial advisors. I thought. I stopped. I thought we were building something together. Gerald's expression was grim. Margaret, you paid off his mortgage. Not your joint mortgage, his mortgage. On a house that he later willed exclusively to his daughter. Cutting you out entirely. The implications settled over me like a weight. I'd used my own retirement savings to pay off his debt, believing I was investing in our shared future. Instead, I'd handed Jennifer and Michael $250,000 of my money. There's more, Gerald said quietly. He pulled out another set of documents. I also found records of the home improvements you mentioned. The new roof, the kitchen renovation, the bathroom updates. You said you paid for those? Yes. Richard's accounts were mostly in investments. He didn't like liquidating them for home repairs. I had more liquid savings, so I covered those expenses. We were married. It was our house. I didn't think twice about it. How much total? I'd calculated it before coming to his office yesterday. But seeing it in black and white was different. $193,000 over the course of our marriage. Plus the mortgage payoff. That's $433,000 of my money that went into his property. Gerald leaned back in his chair. Margaret, this changes everything. You're not just entitled to an equitable share as a surviving spouse. You have a direct claim on that property as a creditor. You can argue unjust enrichment, constructive trust, maybe even fraud. Depending on what Richard told you about how that mortgage money would be used. He didn't lie exactly, I said, trying to be fair even now. He did reorganize our assets. He just reorganized them entirely in his favor. Did you sign any documents acknowledging that money as a gift? No. It was always framed as our finances, our future, our plans. Gerald made notes on his legal pad, his pen moving quickly. Here's what we're going to argue. That house isn't worth $750,000 to the estate. Your equitable interest in it based on your direct financial contributions is at minimum $433,000. That's more than half the current value. We're going to claim you own the majority interest in that property, regardless of whose name is on the deed. I felt something shift inside me. Not quite hope, but something harder. Something that felt like solid ground. Can we win that argument? In Connecticut? With this documentation? Yes. Gerald looked at me directly. Margaret, I've been practicing estate law for 40 years. I've seen a lot of unfair situations. But this? He tapped the mortgage payoff document. This is one of the clearest cases of unjust enrichment I've encountered. You paid off his debt, you improved his property. You enhanced his asset, and then he willed it away from you. No judge is going to look at this favorably. My phone buzzed in my purse. I ignored it. What's our next move? I asked. I'm amending our claim today. We're not just asking for equitable distribution anymore. We're asserting a direct ownership interest in the property, based on your financial contributions. And we're demanding a full accounting of all marital assets, including any other accounts or investments where your money might have been used. Jennifer's going to lose her mind. Jennifer is going to realize she doesn't actually own what she thinks she owns. Gerald smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of an attorney who'd just found the winning strategy. And if she's smart, she'll settle. Because if this goes to court, there's a very real possibility you'll end up owning the house outright. And they'll be the ones getting bought out. I let that sink in. The house, Richard's house, the house I'd been told to vacate in 55 days, might actually become mine. Not because Richard left it to me, but because I'd already bought it with my own money without realizing it. How long until they receive the amended claim? I asked. I'll file this afternoon. They'll have it by end of business today. Gerald started organizing documents back into folders. Be prepared for them to escalate. This is going to make them very angry. I'm prepared, I said. But I wasn't. Not really. Because I didn't yet know what Jennifer was capable of when she was angry. I found out that evening. I'd spent the afternoon at the house, going through more of Richard's papers, looking for any other financial documents that might be relevant. Gerald wanted a complete picture of our marital assets, and I was determined to give him one. Around 6 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I looked through the window and saw Michael standing on the porch, alone this time. He looked agitated, his tie loosened, his jacket rumpled. I remembered Gerald's advice about not engaging with them. But Michael looked genuinely distressed, and some part of me, the part that had known him for a decade, that had celebrated his promotions and sent birthday cards, wanted to at least hear what he had to say. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Margaret, he said. His voice was strained. We need to talk about this lawsuit. You mean my claim against your father's estate? The one protecting my legal rights? It's not just a claim anymore. Jennifer just got the amended filing. You're saying you own our father's house. Our mother's house. I'm saying I paid for more than half of its current value. Which is factually accurate. Michael ran his hand through his hair. This is insane. Dad left you $50,000. That's generous considering you were only married 10 years. Generous. I kept my voice level. Michael, I paid off the mortgage on this house. Do you understand that? $240,000 of my retirement savings went to paying off your father's debt. I didn't give that money as a gift. I contributed it believing I was investing in our shared home. Dad never said anything about that. I'm sure he didn't. Just like I'm sure he never told you that I paid for the new roof. Or the kitchen renovation, or the bathroom upgrades. Nearly $200,000 more. I invested over $400,000 into this property during our marriage. And now you and Jennifer want to take it and give me $50,000. Does that sound fair to you? Michael's face had gone pale. I didn't know about any of that. Well, now you do. And so does your attorney, and soon a judge will know too. He leaned against the porch railing, suddenly looking exhausted. Jennifer is furious. She's talking about fighting this all the way. Dragging it out for years if necessary. She's convinced you're lying about the money, that you're making false claims. I have bank records, Michael. Cancelled checks. Wire transfer receipts. Every dollar is documented. She doesn't care. She says you manipulated Dad. That you're trying to steal what's rightfully ours. He looked at me with something that might have been pleading. Margaret, please. Can't we just work something out? Name a number. What would it take for you to walk away? I thought about that question. What would it take? A sincere apology? An acknowledgement of what I'd sacrificed? Actual grief. That their father was gone, rather than just concern about inheritance? It's not about a number anymore, I said quietly. It's about principle. Your father made promises to me. About our life together, about our future. And then he broke those promises in the most calculated way possible. I'm not walking away from what I'm legally entitled to. Because it's inconvenient for you and Jennifer. Michael pushed off from the railing, anger replacing exhaustion. You know what I think? I think Jennifer's right. I think you saw a wealthy widower and you made your move. Dad was vulnerable after Mom died, and you took advantage. That's what you need to believe, I said. Because the alternative is admitting that your father betrayed someone who loved him, that he used my money and my devotion and gave me nothing in return. It's easier to make me the villain. You are the villain. You're trying to take our mother's house. This hasn't been your mother's house for 12 years. She's been gone a long time, Michael. I'm sorry for that loss, but it doesn't give you the right to erase my existence from your father's life. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his car without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. 2 confrontations in 2 days. Gerald was right, this was escalating. My phone rang. Gerald's name appeared on the screen. They got the amended filing, I said by way of greeting. I know. Their attorney called me 20 minutes ago. He was agitated. Gerald's voice held a note of satisfaction. He suggested we were making frivolous claims. I suggested he review Connecticut case law on unjust enrichment before making accusations. It was a productive conversation. Despite everything, I smiled. Michael just left here. He tried to get me to name a settlement number. What did you say? That it's not about the money. That it's about principle. Good. Don't negotiate with them directly. Everything goes through me. Gerald paused. Margaret, you should know. Their attorney indicated they're going to fight this aggressively. They're going to try to argue that your contributions were gifts. That you understood Richard's children would inherit, that you have no claim on property titled solely in his name. Can they win that argument? Not with the documentation you've provided. But they can make it expensive and time-consuming. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Richard's letter. About his explanation that this was about fairness. To his children, about honoring promises made to his first wife. About how he hoped I'd understand. I'm prepared, I said. After we hung up, I went upstairs to Richard's office and sat at his desk. The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the room. I opened the bottom drawer and took out the cream-colored envelope containing his letter. I read it again, this time with different eyes. Looking not for explanations but for clues. What had Richard been thinking? Had he felt guilty about using my money? Had he convinced himself that $50,000 was adequate compensation? Or had he simply prioritized his children's inheritance over everything else, including basic fairness? I'd never know the answers. Richard was gone, and the dead keep their secrets. But I could control what happened next. I could fight for what was mine. I could refuse to disappear quietly. I turned on the desk lamp and opened my laptop. Gerald had asked for a complete financial history of the marriage. I was going to give him one so detailed, so thoroughly documented, that there would be no room for argument. Hours passed. I barely noticed. I was back in attorney mode. Building a case, marshalling evidence, preparing for trial. It felt familiar. It felt right. Around midnight, I heard a sound outside. A car engine idling in front of the house. I went to the window and looked out. Jennifer's BMW was parked at the curb, the interior light on. She was sitting in the driver's seat, staring at the house. Just sitting there, not moving. I watched her for a long moment. Wondered what she was thinking. Whether she was planning her next move, or grieving her father, or simply trying to understand how everything had become so complicated. Then her interior light went off. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. I went back to the desk and continued working. Tomorrow, Gerald would file additional discovery requests. We'd demand complete records of Richard's financial dealings. During our marriage, we'd depose the attorney who'd drafted that second will. We'd build an airtight case. That would force Jennifer and Michael to either settle fairly or lose in court. This was going to be a long fight. Months, maybe years. But I wasn't going anywhere. This was my house, my home, my life, and I was going to defend it. 3 weeks after filing the amended claim, we received notice that Jennifer and Michael's attorney wanted to depose me. Gerald called it a fishing expedition. They were hoping I'd contradict myself, show uncertainty, or reveal some weakness in our case. They're going to try to rattle you. Gerald warned me the day before the deposition. We were in his conference room again, preparing. They'll ask about your relationship with Richard, your motivations for marrying him, your financial situation before the marriage. They'll try to paint you as calculating, mercenary. I know the game, I said. I've taken dozens of depositions. Being on the other side is different. It's personal when it's your life they're dissecting. He wasn't wrong, but I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Organizing every receipt, every bank statement, every piece of documentation. I knew the facts cold. And facts didn't care about anyone's narrative. The deposition was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the offices of Whitman and Associates, the firm representing the estate. Their conference room was larger than Gerald's, more corporate, with windows overlooking New Haven Harbor. Jennifer and Michael were already there when we arrived, sitting on one side of the long table with their attorney, David Whitman, a man in his mid-50s with silver hair, and an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to. Jennifer didn't look at me when I entered. Michael nodded stiffly. They both looked tired, strained. Good. The court reporter set up her equipment at the head of the table. I sat down across from Whitman, Gerald beside me. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the reporter's fingers on the keys as she entered preliminary information. "Let's begin," Whitman said after I'd been sworn in. His voice was smooth, professionally neutral. "Mrs. Collins, thank you for being here today. I'm going to ask you some questions about your relationship with Richard Collins and the circumstances of your marriage. Please answer truthfully and to the best of your recollection." "Of course," I said. "How did you meet Richard Collins?" "At a charity auction in Hartford. October 2014. And his first wife had recently passed at that time?" 7 months prior, yes. Were you aware of his financial situation when you met him? I kept my expression neutral. Here it came, the gold digger narrative. I knew he was retired and comfortable. We didn't discuss specific finances on our first meeting. But you were aware he owned property, had investments? Eventually, yes. As our relationship developed and became serious, we discussed our respective financial situations. That's normal for couples considering marriage at our age. And your own financial situation at that time? I'd recently retired from Caldwell Walker Law, where I'd been a senior attorney specializing in estate planning and family law. I had retirement savings, a pension, and investment accounts. I was financially stable. Whitman made notes. Why did you retire from legal practice? Richard wanted to travel. He'd spent his career working, raised his family, and wanted to enjoy his remaining years. I was at a point where I could retire early to be with him. So you gave up your career for him? I chose to retire early, yes. It was a mutual decision made as a couple. How much were you earning annually at the time you retired? Gerald had prepared me for this question. Approximately $180,000 per year, not including bonuses. I saw Michael shift in his seat. Jennifer's expression remained frozen. That's a substantial income to walk away from, Whitman observed. It was. But I had adequate retirement savings. And Richard and I were building a life together. The income I gave up was worth it to me at the time. At the time, Whitman repeated. Interesting phrasing. Do you regret that decision now? I regret that the promises made to me weren't kept. I don't regret loving Richard or caring for him. Whitman changed tack. Let's talk about the mortgage payoff. You claim you paid off Richard's mortgage on the marital home with funds from your retirement account. Is that correct? That's correct. $240,000 transferred in March 2017. Did Richard ask you for this money? We discussed combining our finances and restructuring our assets for better tax efficiency. Richard managed our investments and suggested consolidating accounts under his name, since he had existing relationships with financial advisors. So he asked you to transfer retirement funds to him? We discussed it as a couple and agreed it made sense for our joint financial planning. But the money went into his sole account, correct? Not a joint account? Yes. We were in the process of reorganizing everything. I trusted that we were working toward shared goals. Did you expect this money to be returned to you? No. I expected it to be used for our shared benefit. We were married. I believed we were building our future together. Did Richard ever tell you explicitly that this money was being used to pay off the mortgage on the house? I paused, trying to remember the exact conversations. He said he was eliminating debt to improve our cash flow. The mortgage was our largest debt. But he didn't specifically say, Margaret, I'm using your retirement funds to pay off my mortgage on my house, did he? Marriage doesn't work in such transactional terms. We discussed our financial strategy as a couple. I trusted him to implement what we'd agreed upon. But you do understand the legal difference between your claim and what might have been a gift between spouses. Gerald interjected. The documentation makes clear this was not a gift. It was a contribution to marital assets, with the reasonable expectation of shared benefit. Whitman ignored him and continued addressing me. Mrs. Collins, did you and Richard have a prenuptial agreement? No. Why not? Richard said he didn't believe in them. He felt they represented a lack of faith in the marriage. Did you suggest having one? We discussed it briefly. I raised the question given that we both had assets and children from previous relationships. Richard was adamant that it wasn't necessary, that we'd protect each other and be fair to everyone involved. And yet he executed a will that left you only $50,000. Does that seem fair to you? No. That's why we're here. Whitman leaned back in his chair, studying me. Mrs. Collins, you were an estate planning attorney. You specialized in exactly these kinds of situations. Isn't it true that you knew exactly how to position yourself financially during this marriage? I knew how to protect my interests, yes. Which is why I documented everything, kept records, and maintained separate accounts for my personal assets. What I didn't know was that my husband would execute a secret will disinheriting me. You call it secret, but Mr. Collins had every legal right to dispose of his property as he wished. He did, and I have every legal right to claim my equitable share of property. I financially contributed to. That's what we're determining here. Whitman shuffled papers. Let's discuss the home improvements you claim to have paid for. You stated you spent approximately $193,000 on renovations and repairs during your marriage. Correct? Correct. Do you have receipts for all of these expenditures? Yes. Contracts, canceled checks, credit card statements. Everything is documented. And Richard never reimbursed you for any of these expenses? We were married. I wasn't expecting reimbursement. I was maintaining our home. Your home, or his home? I believed it was our home. That's what marriage means. But the deed was in his name only. I'm aware. I'm also aware that Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, where contributions to marital property create legal interests, regardless of whose name is on the title. Whitman's expression tightened slightly. He didn't like me quoting law back at him. Let's talk about Richard's illness, he said, changing direction again. You claim you provided substantial caregiving services during the final 2 years of his life. That's correct. You weren't a licensed nurse or medical professional, were you? No, I was his wife. So when you claim your caregiving services were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're not claiming you provided professional medical care? I'm claiming I provided personal care services. That would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars if we'd hired professionals. Managing medications, coordinating with healthcare providers, assisting with daily living activities, providing companionship and emotional support during a terminal illness. His children visited during this time, didn't they? I glanced at Jennifer and Michael. Jennifer was staring at the table. Michael was looking out the window. Occasionally, I said carefully. How often? Jennifer visited twice over 2 years. Michael came 3 times. And how long were these visits? Jennifer's visits lasted less than an hour each time. Michael stayed slightly longer, perhaps 2 hours per visit. Whitman made a note. Did Richard ever express disappointment that his children weren't more present during his illness? Gerald started to object, but I waved him off. Yes, I said. He was hurt by their absence. But he made excuses for them. Said they were busy with their careers, their own families. He didn't want to be a burden. Jennifer's head came up at that. Our eyes met across the table. I saw something flicker in her expression, guilt, maybe, or anger. Then she looked away. Yet despite their absence, Mr. Collins chose to leave his estate primarily to his children rather than to you. Why do you think that is? I don't know, I said honestly. I've spent weeks trying to understand it. The only explanation I have is the one he left in his letter, that he felt obligated to honor promises made to his first wife about his children's inheritance. So you acknowledge he had obligations to his children? I acknowledge he felt he did. I disagree that those obligations justified disinheriting his current wife, who'd sacrificed her career and spent years caring for him. Sacrificed, Whitman repeated. Strong word. Did Richard force you to retire? No. Did he force you to pay for home improvements? No. Did he force you to provide care during his illness? Of course not. I did those things because I loved him. Because that's what partners do for each other. And yet now you're demanding compensation for that love and care. Doesn't that seem transactional to you? I felt my anger rise but kept my voice level. What seems transactional is being written out of your husband's will. After a decade of marriage. What seems transactional is being told, you have 60 days to move out of your home. What seems transactional is being offered less than 5% of an estate. You contributed nearly $500,000 to. The room went silent. Whitman made more notes. Let's discuss the second will, he said. The one executed 6 months before Mr. Collins's death. Were you aware he was meeting with an attorney at that time? No. Did he ever discuss updating his estate plan with you? Not in those final months. Earlier in our marriage, yes. We'd discussed ensuring both his children and I were provided for. So it's possible he simply didn't mention this particular update? It's possible he deliberately concealed it, knowing I would object to being disinherited. Or it's possible he made a difficult decision about his estate, and didn't want to cause conflict while he was seriously ill. It's possible. It's also possible that if he'd been honest with me, I would have made different choices about how I spent my money and my time. Whitman leaned forward. Mrs. Collins, isn't it true that, if you'd known about this will, you might have left the marriage? The question hung in the air. Gerald tensed beside me, ready to object, but I saw where this was going. I don't know, I said slowly. I'd like to think I would have stayed, and cared for Richard anyway, because I loved him. But I also think I deserved the chance to make that choice with full information. He took that choice away from me. So you might have abandoned a dying man because you wouldn't inherit enough? I might have protected my financial interests differently if I'd known my husband was planning to leave me nearly nothing. That's not abandonment. That's basic self-preservation. Whitman made a note, then consulted his papers. I'd like to ask about your daughter, Emily. She was excluded from your late husband's will as well, correct? I stiffened. Emily isn't Richard's biological daughter. He had no obligation to her. But you have other children from your previous marriage. Did you expect Richard to provide for them in his will? We discussed it. Richard said he'd leave small bequests to my children, as I planned to do for his. But ultimately, I expected we'd take care of each other. And then our respective children would inherit after we were both gone. So you did have expectations about inheritance? I had expectations about being treated as an equal partner in my marriage. Yes. Whitman flipped through more pages. Mrs. Collins, your daughter Emily had a falling out with you recently. Didn't she? Something about a wedding? My stomach dropped. How did he know about that? That's not relevant to this case, Gerald interjected sharply. It goes to credibility and character, Whitman said smoothly. Mrs. Collins is claiming she's a devoted family member who sacrifices for others. I'm trying to establish a pattern of behavior. My relationship with my daughter has nothing to do with my marriage to Richard, I said. Doesn't it? You were willing to cut off financial support to your own child over a perceived slight. Isn't it possible you're using similar tactics, now weaponizing money to punish Richard's children for not treating you the way you think you deserve? That's completely different, is it? In both cases, you withdrew financial support when you felt disrespected. In both cases, you used money as leverage to force others to acknowledge your importance. I felt my face flush. My situation with Emily was personal and private. It has nothing to do with my legal rights as Richard's widow. It has everything to do with your character, Mrs. Collins. It establishes that you're someone who keeps score, who expects returns on your generosity, who punishes people financially when they disappoint you. Gerald slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. You're not deposing her about her parenting. Stick to relevant questions about the marriage and the estate. Or we're done here. Whitman held up his hands in mock surrender. Fine. Let's move on. He turned back to me. Mrs. Collins, during your marriage to Richard, did you ever discuss what would happen if he died first? We discussed it generally. We both assumed we'd take care of each other. Did Richard ever tell you specifically what he planned to leave you? He said I'd be provided for. That I wouldn't have to worry. Did he give you a specific dollar amount? No. Did he promise you the house? He promised me we'd grow old together in it. I assumed that meant I'd continue living there after he passed. Assumptions aren't legally binding, Mrs. Collins. Neither is betrayal, Mr. Whitman. But here we are. He smiled thinly. One final question. If you win this case, if you get a substantial settlement or ownership of the house, what will you do? I'll live in my home. The one I paid for. The one I maintained. The one I earned. And Richard's children? What do you think they deserve? I looked across the table at Jennifer and Michael. They were both watching me now, waiting for my answer. I think they deserve exactly what their father gave them, I said quietly. Everything he earned during his first marriage. Everything he inherited from their mother. Everything that existed before I came into the picture. But what we built together during our marriage, that's partly mine. And I'm not letting it go. Whitman closed his notebook. No further questions. The deposition ended. Jennifer and Michael left quickly, avoiding eye contact. Their attorney stayed behind to schedule follow-up depositions. He wanted to question me more about specific financial transactions. And he'd be deposing Gerald about his own legal practice and relationship with me. In the elevator going down, Gerald turned to me. You did well, he said. Better than well. You stayed calm when he tried to provoke you. You gave clear answers, and you didn't get defensive. He knew about Emily, I said. How did he know about that? They've probably been investigating you. Talking to neighbors, checking social media, looking for anything they can use. It's standard in high-stakes litigation. Is it going to hurt our case? Gerald was quiet for a moment. It gives them a character argument. But it's not legally relevant to your claim. A judge will focus on the financial facts, not your relationship with your daughter. We stepped out of the building into cold November air. I pulled my coat tighter. How much longer? I asked. Until trial? Could be 6 months, could be a year. They'll drag it out as long as possible, hoping you'll run out of money or patience. He looked at me seriously. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the house, sitting empty so many evenings now. Just me and Richard's ghost. About the bills from Gerald's firm that were starting to accumulate. About Jennifer's BMW parked outside at midnight, watching. I'm prepared, I said. But that night, alone in the house, I felt less certain. The deposition had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. Not the questions about Richard or the money. I'd expected those. But the questions about Emily had cut deep, exposing a wound I'd tried to ignore. Was Whitman right? Was I someone who weaponized money, who kept score? Who punished people for disappointing me? I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in Richard's study. Our study. Whatever. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. This is Jennifer. We need to talk. Privately. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the coffee shop on Elm Street. Please come. I stared at the message for a long time. Gerald had said not to meet with them without him present. But something in the tone of the message felt different. Less combative. Almost desperate. I texted back, I'll be there. The coffee shop on Elm Street was one of those deliberately rustic places exposed. Brick, mismatched furniture, local art on the walls. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner, where we could talk privately. The lunch rush had ended, leaving only a handful of customers scattered throughout the space. Jennifer arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. She looked different than I'd ever seen. Her no designer clothes, no carefully styled hair. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. She looked exhausted. She ordered coffee at the counter, then joined me at the table. For a long moment, we just sat there in silence. Thank you for coming, she finally said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the professional polish she usually wore like armor. Your attorney would be furious if he knew we were meeting, I said. I know. Michael doesn't know either. This is just me. I waited. She'd asked for this meeting. Let her explain why. Jennifer wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, like she was trying to warm herself. That deposition yesterday, when you talked about Dad being hurt, that we weren't there more during his illness, that we made excuses. She paused. You were right, Jennifer. No, let me finish. Please. She took a breath. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you weeks ago, but I was too angry and too scared. I stayed silent, watching her carefully. Dad didn't write that will because he wanted to protect our inheritance, Jennifer said. He wrote it because I asked him to. The words landed like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten. 6 months before he died, I flew down to visit, Jennifer continued, not meeting my eyes. Michael and I had been talking about the estate, about what would happen when Dad passed. We'd assumed everything would be split somehow between us and you. But we weren't sure, so I came to ask him directly. What did you say to him? My voice came out barely above a whisper. I told him we were worried. That you'd only been married a few years, that he had children who'd known him their whole lives, that it wasn't fair if someone who'd been in his life such a short time ended up with everything our mother worked for. She finally looked up at me. I told him we needed him to protect our inheritance. That it was what Mom would have wanted. The room felt like it was tilting. You manipulated a dying man into disinheriting his wife. I didn't see it that way then. I saw it as protecting what was rightfully ours. What Dad and Mom built together. Her voice cracked slightly. He was so sick by then, Margaret. So tired. He didn't want conflict. He just wanted peace. And I pushed him. Did Michael know? Yes. We both agreed I should talk to Dad. Michael thought it would be better coming from me. We were always closer, Dad and I. Or at least we used to be, before Mom died. She wiped at her eyes. After I talked to him, Dad called his attorney. Had the new will drawn up within a week. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting my family. I couldn't speak. All this time, I'd been trying to understand why Richard had done this. Whether he'd fallen out of love with me. Whether I'd disappointed him somehow, whether his judgment had been compromised by illness. But it wasn't any of those things. He'd been pressured by his daughter. While he was dying, too weak to fight, too tired to resist. Why are you telling me this now? I finally managed. Because that deposition yesterday made me see something I'd been avoiding. When you talked about the money you contributed, the care you provided, the sacrifices you made, I realized I didn't actually know anything about your marriage to my father. I'd convinced myself you were some opportunist who'd trapped him. Because that was easier than admitting I was jealous. Jealous? Of how happy he was with you. How alive he seemed those first few years after you married. How much he smiled when he talked about you, about your plans together. Jennifer's voice was thick with tears now. My parents had a good marriage, but it wasn't joyful. They were companions, partners, but I don't remember them laughing together the way Dad laughed with you. And I resented that. I resented that he found that kind of happiness with someone else. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to rage at her, to let her feel the full weight of what she'd done. But another part recognized the grief in her voice, the genuine remorse. After you filed that amended claim, Jennifer continued, Michael and I started going through Dad's papers more carefully. We found his old bank statements, the records of your transfers, the receipts for all the work you paid for on the house. We saw how much you actually contributed. And then we found something else. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Slid it across the table to me. It was a letter, written in Richard's handwriting. Different paper than the one I'd found in his desk, older looking. Dated 3 years into our marriage. My hands shook as I unfolded it and began to read. To my children, I'm writing this because I want you to understand something important about Margaret and our marriage. I know you've been distant since we married, and I understand why. You're still grieving your mother. You're worried about family legacy. But I need you to know Margaret didn't take anything from you. She gave me back my life. When your mother died, I thought my life was effectively over. I'd do my time, see my grandchildren grow up, and eventually fade away. I didn't expect to fall in love again. I didn't expect to feel young and hopeful and excited about the future. Margaret gave me that. She retired from a career she loved to travel with me. She's smart and funny, and challenges me in ways I haven't been challenged in years. She makes me want to be better. And she asks for nothing except my company and my love. I've seen how you treat her politely, but distantly, like she's a temporary fixture in my life rather than my chosen partner. It hurts me. She deserves better from you, and from me. I'm writing this to make clear that when I die, I want Margaret cared for. She should have the house, enough money to live comfortably. Security for her future. This isn't about disinheriting you, you'll inherit plenty. But Margaret comes first. She's my wife, and she's earned every bit of my love and respect. Please, when I'm gone, treat her with the kindness she deserves. She'll need family, and whether you like it or not, she is family now. Your father. I read it twice, tears blurring the words. This was the Richard I'd known. The one who'd loved me, valued me, wanted to protect me. Where did you find this? I asked. In a safe deposit box. We only got access last week. It took time to get the bank authorization. There were other papers there too. An older will that matched what he wrote in this letter. It left you the house and a substantial portion of his estate. The will we all thought existed. But he changed it after you talked to him. Yes. Jennifer's face crumpled. Margaret, I took this from you. I manipulated my dying father into betraying someone he loved. And then I had the audacity to show up at his funeral and act like you were the problem. I folded the letter carefully, my hands still shaking. Does Michael know about this? I showed it to him last night. He was horrified. We both were. She wiped her eyes. We called Whitman this morning and told him we want to settle. That we're not contesting your claim anymore. I looked at her carefully. Why? Because you feel guilty, or because you actually believe I deserve it? Both. But mostly because it's right. Jennifer took a shaky breath. That deposition yesterday, when Whitman was attacking you, I watched you defend yourself, watched you stay calm and clear. Even when he was being deliberately cruel. And I thought, this is the woman who took care of my father for 2 years. While Michael and I were too busy with our own lives to visit. This is the woman who paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain his home and his health. This is the woman Dad loved enough to write that letter about. And we've treated you like an enemy. What are you proposing? Keep the house. It's yours. You paid for most of it anyway, and it's been your home for a decade. We'll take the investment accounts and retirement funds. That's still substantial, more than enough to honor Dad's intention that we inherit something. We'll split the $50,000 he left you between the 3 of us as a token amount. But the house and any marital assets you contributed to are yours. I tried to process what she was saying. Jennifer, the house is worth $750,000. And you put over $400,000 into it. Plus you gave up a legal career that would have earned you well over $1 million in the years since you retired. Plus you provided care that would have cost another $250,000 if we'd hired professionals. She smiled sadly. I'm a financial analyst, Margaret. I can do math. You've more than earned that house. What does Michael say? He agrees. He's ashamed, honestly. We both are. I sat back in my chair, trying to understand if this was real. After weeks of fighting, after depositions and legal threats and midnight surveillance, Jennifer was offering me exactly what I'd been claiming I deserved. I need to talk to my attorney, I said slowly. Of course. Have Gerald draft whatever agreement makes sense. We'll sign it. Jennifer paused. Margaret, I know this doesn't fix what we did. It doesn't undo the pain we caused or the way we treated you. But I hope it's a start toward making things right. Why now? I asked. Why not weeks ago, before the deposition, before all of this escalated? Because I needed to see you fight. I needed to understand who you really are. Jennifer's voice was quiet but steady. When you showed up to that deposition and held your ground, when you refused to be intimidated or shamed. When you defended your contributions without apology, that's when I finally saw what Dad saw in you. Strength. Integrity. Someone who knows her worth and won't settle for less. We sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop was nearly empty now, just us and the barista cleaning tables. There's something else, Jennifer said. Something I need to ask you, and I'll understand if you say no. I waited. Michael and I want to go through Dad's things with you. Not to claim anything, just to understand his life better. The life he had with you. We missed so much of his final years, and we can't get that time back. But maybe we can at least learn about it. If you're willing to share. I thought about Richard's office upstairs, the shelves full of books we'd read together, the desk where he'd written me love notes and left them for me to find, the photos of trips we'd taken, the small artifacts of our decade together. I'd like that, I said. Actually, I'd like that very much. Jennifer nodded, her eyes bright with tears again. Thank you. For everything. For taking care of him. For making him happy. For not giving up when we tried to push you out. I couldn't give up, I said simply. It's my home. We finished our coffee and exchanged phone numbers. Jennifer promised to call in a few days to set up a time. To go through Richard's belongings together. As she was leaving, she turned back. Margaret? That thing with your daughter. The wedding. I don't know the full story. But I saw how Whitman tried to use it against you yesterday. And I just want to say I get it now. Sometimes the people we love disappoint us. Sometimes we have to set boundaries to protect ourselves. That doesn't make us bad people. It makes us human. After she left, I sat alone. In the coffee shop for a long time, holding Richard's letter. The one that showed his true intentions. The one that proved he'd loved me and wanted to protect me. He'd written this letter 3 years into our marriage. Then, 3 years later, his daughter had convinced him to betray everything. He'd written here. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or heartbroken. Maybe both. That evening, I called Gerald and told him about the meeting with Jennifer. About her offer to settle. Don't trust it, was his immediate response. This could be a tactic. Get you to drop your guard, then pull the offer. I don't think so, I said. She showed me a letter Richard wrote. His original intentions for the estate. She knows she manipulated him into changing it. Did you get this letter in writing? I took a photo. I'll email it to you. There was a pause while Gerald processed this. If she's serious about settling on those terms, you keep the house, they take the investment accounts, we should memorialize it immediately. Get it signed before anyone changes their mind. Can you draft something? I'll have it ready by tomorrow afternoon. But Margaret. His voice became serious. Are you sure this is what you want? We could push for more. With this letter and all your documentation. We could argue for a larger share of everything. I looked around the house. My house. The home I'd lived in for 10 years. The space I'd maintained and improved and filled with love. The house is enough, I said. It's all I ever wanted. The settlement papers were signed within a week. Jennifer and Michael agreed to transfer full ownership of the house to me. In exchange, they would receive Richard's investment and retirement accounts, which totaled just over $900,000. The $50,000 Richard had left me would be split 3 ways, a symbolic gesture that we'd all once been family. Gerald reviewed everything carefully before I signed. This is fair, he admitted. More than fair, actually. You're giving up a potential claim on those investment accounts. I don't want their money, I said. I just want my home. On the day we finalized everything, Jennifer and Michael came to the house as promised. We spent the afternoon going through Richard's belongings together. Jennifer cried when she found photos from her childhood. Michael laughed at old letters Richard had saved. I showed them the medical binders I'd kept, the detailed records of Richard's treatment. The small victories and setbacks. You really did take care of him, Michael said quietly, paging through the logs. I don't think we understood how much. He was easy to care for, I said. He was grateful and patient and brave. Even at the end, we divided Richard's personal effects, his watch to Michael, his book collection to Jennifer. His photos distributed among all of us. They didn't take much. Mostly they just wanted to be there, to touch things he'd touched, to feel close to him again. Before they left, Jennifer hugged me. A real hug, not the stiff, obligatory embraces we'd exchanged at the funeral. Thank you, she whispered. For giving him a good final chapter. For fighting for what was yours. For not letting us erase you. After they left, I stood in the empty living room. The house felt different now. Not haunted by Richard's ghost or poisoned by betrayal. Just quiet, peaceful, mine. I walked through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with my own home. The kitchen where I'd made countless meals. The bedroom where Richard and I had shared our last conversations. The office where I'd worked for weeks building my legal case. The garden where we'd watched birds together. All of it mine now. Not because Richard had left it to me, but because I'd fought for it. Because I'd refused to accept less than I deserved. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily, the first in weeks. Mom, can we talk? I miss you. I'm sorry for everything. I looked at the message for a long time. Thought about Jennifer's words in the coffee shop. About boundaries and disappointment and being human. Then I typed back, come for dinner this weekend. We have a lot to discuss. Some bridges could be rebuilt. Some wounds could heal. Not because the hurt went away. But because real love was about choosing each other even after disappointment. I'd learned that from Richard, in a backwards sort of way. He'd loved me enough to write that letter 3 years into our marriage. Then he'd loved his children enough to betray that intention. When they asked him to. Love didn't always look like protection. Sometimes it looked like complicated, messy, human failure. But I'd also learned something else. I'd learned that I could protect myself. That I could fight for what was mine without apologizing. That I could set boundaries and demand respect and refuse to disappear quietly. I'd learned, finally, that I was worth fighting for. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine, not the one I'd been saving, but a new one. A celebration. I took it out to the back porch and sat in the fading light. Listening to birds and neighborhood sounds and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. The house was mine. The life was mine. The future was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. 3 months later, on a sunny afternoon in early spring, I hosted a dinner party. Emily came, tentative but genuine, working on rebuilding what we'd broken. Jennifer and Michael came too, by invitation. Because family, even complicated, reconstructed family, mattered. We ate in the dining room where Richard and I used to host holiday meals. We talked about him honestly, the good and the difficult. The ways he'd succeeded and failed as a father and husband. We laughed at his jokes we all remembered. We cried a little too. And when everyone left and the house was quiet again, I sat in Richard's study, my study. Now, and added a final entry to the journal I'd been keeping through all of this. Dear Richard, I was 60 years old, alone in a house I'd fought a legal battle to keep. My relationships with my children were complicated and required work. My bank account was smaller than it might have been. If I'd never married Richard at all. But I owned my home. I owned my story. I owned my choices. And that, I'd learned, was worth more than any inheritance. The end was just the beginning.